My God, this is good. Have you ever just taken 2 pieces of bread and just smothered it with syrup? Or more specifically, molasses? Man, it's just the best thing ever. And sometimes, I just drink it straight from the can. Yes, I buy my molasses in cans, not jars. Are you judging me? Anyway, I had a point here. Oh yes, have you ever heard of the Great Molasses Flood of 1919? Well, even if you have, too bad. I'm going to tell you about it. And if you like hearing about history topics like this, be sure to subscribe, as I release one of these babies each Friday. Now, let's get going. It was just after noon on January 15th, 1919, when Boston was shaken by one of the strangest disasters in American history. On that cold winter day, a tidal wave swept through the city's north end, toppling buildings, crushing railways, and leaving dozens dead. But this was no ordinary flood. This wave was made not of water, but of molasses. To this day, the story is almost unbelievable. Eyewitnesses described a dark wall of syrup, 25 feet high, moving faster than a horse could gallop. Streets were submerged, homes and businesses splintered. Lives were lost in a torrent that seemed both absurd and horrifying. And yet, this bizarre tragedy was entirely real, a catastrophe born of negligence, greed, and hubris. Boston in the early 20th century was a city in transition. The North End, where the flood struck, was home to thousands of working-class immigrants, particularly Italian and Irish families. Narrow cobblestone streets wound between crowded tenement buildings, their balconies crowded with laundry lines and children, leaning out to watch the bustle below. It was a neighborhood of small grocers, bakeries, blacksmith shops, and stables. Horses clattered along the streets, pulling wagons heavy with goods. Dock workers moved between warehouses and ships, loading and unloading cargo from across the world. The air smelled of salt from the harbor, coal smoke from chimneys, and, increasingly, molasses. Gotta love it! Molasses may seem like a simple household sweetener today, but in 1919, it was an industrial commodity of enormous value. Imported by the shipload from the Caribbean, it was distilled into rum and industrial alcohol. That alcohol was used not only for drinking, but for producing munitions, a critical industry during the First World War, which had just ended a few months earlier. In fact, the very molasses stored in the North End would have been destined for the war effort. The Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company, oversaw this business in Boston. To meet demand, they constructed a massive storage tank in the North End, a looming cylinder of steel towering 50 feet over the neighborhood. And see, this is what I've been telling my friends. I miss the good old days where we could build huge-ass vats of gooey, refined sugar that would loom over residential areas. Damn government always treading on us. From the start, the molasses tank was a disaster waiting to happen. Built hastily in 1915, the tank was designed with little regard for safety. The steel walls were thinner than engineering standards required, and the rivets holding them together were prone to cracking. The man responsible for overseeing its construction was not an engineer, but a manager with no background in structural design. The company never conducted proper tests. No inspectors certified its safety. The tank was filled regardless. Soon, the neighborhood noticed something was wrong. Almost immediately, the tank began to leak. Molasses oozed down the sides, forming sticky pools at its base. Children played a dangerous game of collecting it in cups. Adults worried openly. Workers reported hearing ominous groans and creaks echoing from inside. Instead of addressing the problem, the company chose to hide it. They painted the tank brown, not to prevent leaks, but to camouflage them. Complaints from neighbors were brushed aside. The molasses kept flowing in. Honestly, these neighbors sound like a bunch of butt faces. Leave this poor business alone. Money is at stake. Money, I tell you. January 15th, 1919 dawned bright, but unseasonably warm. After weeks of freezing weather, temperatures rose rapidly to over 40 degrees. Inside the tank, the molasses expanded as it warmed, fermenting and producing gas. Pressure built against the steel walls, already weakened by years of neglect. At 12:30 p.m., the inevitable happened. The tank burst apart with a sound like cannon fire. Massive steel plates, some weighing thousands of pounds, were hurled through the air. Rivets flew like bullets. Witnesses recalled a deep rumble, followed by what they described as the roar of an explosion. Then came the flood. More than 2 million gallons of molasses surged outward, forming a wave 25 feet high. It moved at 35 miles per hour, faster than most people could run. Wooden buildings crumpled like matchsticks. A section of the city's elevated railway buckled, tossing train tracks into the air. Wagons were overturned, cars crushed, and horses drowned in the sticky tide. People caught in the open stood little chance. One eyewitness described the scene as an ocean of molasses swallowing the neighborhood. The human toll was staggering. 21 people lost their lives, and more than 150 were injured. Victims included workers, children, and passers-by who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among them was an 8-year-old boy named Pasquale Iantosca, swept away by the wave while playing outside. Firefighter George Leahy died while rescuing others, pinned beneath the wreckage of his firehouse. Workers from nearby stables drowned alongside their horses, unable to escape. Survivors told haunting stories. Some recalled hearing cries for help muffled beneath the thick syrup, voices they could not reach. Others described fighting for each step, their feet glued in place as they struggled to pull free. Those who managed to survive often bore lifelong injuries, from broken bones to lasting respiratory damage caused by inhaling molasses. Rescue crews rushed in within minutes. Police officers, firefighters, sailors from a nearby naval ship, all fought to save lives. But they found themselves hindered at every turn. The molasses clung to clothing, boots, and tools. It hardened quickly in the cold air, turning from liquid to glue. Firefighters tried to cut through debris with axes and saws, but even lifting their arms was exhausting in the heavy syrup. Horses panicked and flailed, often injuring those who tried to save them. Some rescuers sank waist-deep and had to be pulled out by ropes. The operation stretched into the night. Lanterns lit the scene as rescuers continued to search for victims. By the next morning, the full devastation was clear. Streets were unrecognizable, coated in molasses and wreckage. The cleanup was as infamous as the flood itself. Crews shoveled hardened molasses into carts, pumped what they could into the harbor, and used sand and sawdust to soak up the rest. For weeks, the work continued, with every surface coated in a sticky residue. The molasses spread far beyond the north end. Workers, horses, and wagons carried it through the streets. Residents tracked it into their homes. Subways and trains were stained with it. Sailors claimed their ships' decks were coated after docking in Boston. Newspapers wrote that the entire city seemed to glisten with sugar. And then there was the smell, a sickly sweetness that clung to the air. For decades, Bostonians swore that on hot summer days, the scent of molasses would rise once more. In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company tried to deflect blame. They claimed anarchists had sabotaged the tank, a fear not entirely out of place in 1919. Boston, like much of America, was gripped by labor unrest and the first Red Scare. Strikes and bombings had raised tensions, and many were ready to believe in sabotage. But as investigations began, the evidence pointed elsewhere. Engineers and experts demonstrated that the tank had been structurally unsound from the beginning. Steel samples revealed it was too thin. Rivets had popped loose under pressure. The entire structure had been built without proper oversight. The lawsuits piled up. More than 100 were filed, making it one of the longest legal battles in Massachusetts history. For 6 years, testimony filled the courts. Survivors and experts gave accounts, while company lawyers tried to shift responsibility. In the end, the verdict was clear. Negligence, not sabotage, had caused the disaster. The company was ordered to pay $628,000 in damages, around $10 million today. Each victim's family received about $7,000, a significant sum at the time, but far from adequate compensation for lives destroyed. The Great Molasses Flood had lasting consequences. It reshaped public expectations of corporate responsibility. From then on, cities demanded stricter regulations, building codes, and inspections. No longer could massive structures be erected without engineering approval. The disaster also became part of Boston's folklore. It was retold in newspapers, books, and eventually classrooms. For decades, residents spoke of the sticky footprints left across the city and of the smell that clung to the air on hot days. The tragedy became both a cautionary tale and a strange curiosity, remembered not just for its loss of life, but for its surreal nature. Some disasters are forgotten, eclipsed by wars and politics, but the Great Molasses Flood endures precisely because of its oddity. It was a catastrophe that seemed almost impossible, yet it happened, a reminder of how negligence can transform the ordinary into the deadly. On that January day in 1919, sweetness itself turned into a weapon of destruction. And for generations afterward, Bostonians swore they could still smell it, the faint, sugary trace of the day molasses drowned a city. Thanks for sticking around. I told my agent no more of these awful jokes. Why does no one listen to me? Am I screaming into a void here? Anyway, if you like historical content like this, please hit that like button and drop a comment. What do you think of this odd, tragic tale? And we have a new historical documentary every Friday, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.